Crossing, Oak Grove. Oh, sorry. Okay. So we have one speaker for oral communications, Richard Brand.
Richard Brand, remember my name?
Yeah, yeah, got it right. Man, long memory.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you, committee. Richard Brand, 281 Addison, Palo Alto resident. And I guess my question is for the mayor, if he's not here. There was a letter drafted by San Mateo County Supervisor Slocum to the MTC in support of the Dumbarton Bridge Rail Project. And it was, it's been supported by Supervisor Simidian. And I'm checking to see if the city, and maybe, Josh, maybe you know, the mayor had asked me for the address, email address, but I don't see any letter. So I have a question, and the question is, excuse me, the city sent a letter in support of. There we go. So my question is this, has the city sent a letter or drafted a letter, because it has to go through council, in support of the San Mateo County Supervisor's request that MTC provide funding for Dumbarton Rail renovation? Thank you.
I don't know if you want to answer.
Sure. So we did send a comment letter to the project manager for the Samtrans Dumbarton Corridor Study, generally voicing support for the project, but also expressing some concerns around the some of the projects that are contained in that particular study. Since then, MTC has actually initiated the Dumbarton Forward initiative, and the city of Palo Alto is a stakeholder on that. And I think the intent of that is to take the Samtrans study one step further and potentially line up funding for some of the investments. So we are working closely with MTC on that.
Okay, so now we'll go to item number 1, which is a presentation by Menlo Park.
Yes, today we're joined by Angela Obeso. She's a senior transportation engineer with the city of Menlo Park, and she's also the project manager for their grade separation project. And we invited her here today to give us an overview of where they are on their project.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today and hosting us. Like Josh said, my name is Angela Obeso. I'm the project manager for the study in Menlo Park, looking at the Ravenswood Avenue Railroad crossing and potentially looking at grade separating other crossings that we have in the city. Just to give you a frame of reference, here's a map of the city of Menlo Park and all of our Caltrain crossings. Palo Alto is to the right of the screen there. The yellow lines are our city limits. And we currently have 4 existing at-grade crossings with the Caltrain system. Ravenswood Avenue is the one closest to Palo Alto here, and that is our highest volume of all types of modes, the most vehicles, pedestrians, and bicyclists. Oak Grove is next going north, and it's our second highest volume location. Then Glenwood and Encinal are more in a residential type neighborhood. So just to give you a frame of reference there, the Caltrain station in Menlo Park is between Ravenswood and Oak Grove. And just as an FYI, there's a set of crossover tracks that allow Caltrain to operate single tracking or switch when they have incidents. There's a set of tracks between the creek and our Ravenswood crossing. So just to give a little project background, we've done numerous studies over the years. The most recent that the city of Menlo Park has headed up were done in 2003-2004, and those were feasibility studies to really identify what types of crossings would be the most feasible for our constraints, looking at within the city of Menlo Park itself. That study looked at the full range from basic undercross, overpass, also looked at trench, the wide variety, and the findings for those studies helped to define the scope of the study that we're doing right now. And that basically the findings of that study found that the 2 most feasible options were what we're calling the hybrid, which would raise the rail tracks a little bit and lower the road a little bit to kind of split the difference of the grade difference you need there. The other option was an underpass, where the train rail stays at its existing elevation and the roadways would go under. So then that brings us to kind of where we are today, getting together the project scope for what we're currently doing. In 2013, the San Mateo County Transportation Authority had a call for grade separation projects as part of the Measure A grant funds. And so we applied and we received $750,000 to study, basically to build on those 2003-2004 studies and to come up with a preferred alternative so we can move forward. We did extensive coordination with our own rail subcommittee, which is made up of 2 of our council members. We got council direction, and we did a lot of meeting and discussing with Caltrain and the San Mateo County Transportation Authority to make sure that our scope met not only Menlo Park's needs, but we took into account Caltrain's constraints. In late 2015, we issued an RFP, and in March of 2016, we awarded a contract to AECom, and we got started right away with our community outreach. We did a lot of community outreach to date, 3 public meetings, met with the chamber, and ongoing one-on-one property and business owner meetings, just to make sure that all the folks who are potentially impacted by the project were aware and were able to give their feedback. We also went to a number of our commission meetings, and to date we have attended 3 council meetings, most recently on October 10th, where we asked our council, we presented some of the same information that I'm going to present shortly here, but we asked them to pick a preferred alternative. And there were 4 out of 5 council members present. They were unable to make a motion that evening, so they asked us to come back with some more information. And we're tentatively scheduled to go back to the council in, most likely it'll be in January based on the current council workload right now, to ask them again to present the information they asked for, and then also to ask them for a preferred alternative. So as of right now, we do not yet have a preferred alternative. So with all that community outreach that we did, we heard a lot of reoccurring themes, and I'm sure these are things that your residents here are familiar with and have similar comments about. There's a strong desire to see more grade separations, look at improving more than just Ravenswood. There's a desire to minimize the height of the railroad because of concerns about visual and noise impacts. There's a high level of pedestrian and bicycle interest to make sure that anything we do improves the connectivity across east-west. And also, we have an intersection at Ravenswood with Alma Street that's currently we do not have the ability to drive straight through on Alma or make left turns to or from. So there's some interest there in reestablishing that connectivity between Alma and Ravenswood. There's some other items there. I won't go through them all, but I'm happy to answer questions if you're interested. So based on the feedback that we heard, we developed these 3 alternatives, and this is what we initially went to the community and the council with. We had alternative A, which is what we're calling the underpass. It would look at Ravenswood only. The 2003-2004 studies looked at doing an underpass at all 4, but due to the fact that there were so many extreme impacts to private properties, we focused on Ravenswood for the purposes of this study because that's our, like I mentioned, that's our highest volume location. So that would keep the railroad at existing elevation, and it would trench Ravenswood approximately 22 feet from where it is today. That option, and I'll show a visualization in a moment, Alma and Ravenswood would no longer be able to be connected. So the train tracks would be at their existing elevation, Alma Street would be at its existing elevation, and Ravenswood would go underneath both of them. Oak Grove, Glenwood, Encinal, our other 3 would remain as existing. There'd be no changes under that alternative. Then when we started looking at the hybrid option, which is the train goes up a little, roads go down a little, we came up with 2 variations. Alternative B looked at just Ravenswood and Oak Grove as grade separations, and it was a more extreme, so to speak, grade. It went up sharper and came down sharper, and so the highest rail elevation under this option was higher than B or C. And then alternative C had a more gradual rail slope, so it came up a little and it just stayed constant for a bulk of the city, and it grade separated Ravenswood, Oak Grove, and Glenwood. Looking at the feedback that we'd received, really it pointed to a preference of alternative C over alternative B as the hybrid option to move forward with. And so we, after we got council direction on this matter, we eliminated alternative B and focused on C, A and C, as we move forward into the last round of community engagement and council meetings. So the next couple of slides I show are going to be visualizations that our consultant team did. This one is alternative A, and we'll start as if we're over El Camino and Ravenswood, and we'll kind of fly over in a 360 rotation. So here you can see Ravenswood goes down. There's some retaining walls up to the train station there, and the parking lot on it's the Big Five, Jeffrey's Hamburgers area. Yeah, looking north here. So here you can see Alma Street is also on a structure above Ravenswood. That's the library underneath us right there. And then you can see that a lot of the side streets, so Merrill and Alma Lane, Alma Lane. We've got Alma Lane and Alma Street right next to each other. Both of those lose connectivity to Ravenswood as well. And then here we fly over, this is looking now south, and you can see the station area. And the station area layout itself is just a graphical representation. This is not necessarily what it would look like. And now we're over the building where Kepler's and Cafe Baroni are, and going back over to El Camino. Under this alternative, the sidewalks for Ravenswood would be at a separate elevation than the roadway. If you imagine Jefferson Street in Redwood City, how the sidewalks are higher, this is similar to what we'd be looking at here due to the ADA requirements. So to get Ravenswood down 22 feet would take more than the 5% that ADA requires, so they would be separated there. The next simulation is looking at alternative C. So this is the hybrid. And again, we'll start as if we're flying over at El Camino. And you can see it's a more gradual grade down. Merrill Lane there behind Kepler's and Baroni is able to maintain connection to Ravenswood. The retaining walls there are not as high because the roadway only now goes down about 10 or 11 feet. Alma and Ravenswood here has a full connection. Likely we would add a traffic signal there, and we'd be able to make left turns in and out of all four directions. Alma Lane and Knoll Lane are able to connect to Ravenswood. So basically maintaining most of the connectivity. There's a few driveways we would have to alter in this scenario. And this is somewhat similar to the San Carlos, where Old County Road is right behind. It would look similar to that. And again, here we're looking south in the station area, and then over Kepler's. Then next it will start to fly north as if we're over the rail itself. And so it'll give you a view of what Oak Grove and Glenwood intersections would look like as well. So here's Oak Grove right here, and we would again maintain connections to the side streets. It's about a 10-foot and reducing rail elevation from existing here. And this is Glenwood, where we would go back to existing rail elevation before we hit Encinal, which is our northernmost at-grade crossing. So under alternative C, the one out of the four would remain as existing. And one of the questions that our council asked us was if we could do something with Encinal. And so one of the things we're doing right now is looking at if there are options to grade separate, perhaps just for pedestrians and bikes, or if we were able to grade separate full vehicles, what impacts that would have overall and potentially into the town of Atherton. So with all of that, we did a comparison matrix here to try to illustrate what the differences between A and C are. And kind of the main takeaway here is that with alternative A, you have improvements with the light blue color, and they're more moderate improvements, but then your impacts are also relatively moderate as well, and it's a little lower of a cost. With alternative C, you have a much greater level of improvements, but your impacts are also much greater as well because you've got more than one set of crossings, more than one street going on at the same time, and a slightly higher cost. So at our final community meeting, we presented this, and we also presented some constructability constraints, such as a need for a shoe fly track, potential staging impacts, and asked the community to basically vote, which one do you prefer, A or C? And of the 55 attendees we had that evening, more than 85% said that they preferred alternative C, mostly because it got more grade separations and better east-west connectivity overall through the town. Those that did support alternative A said they preferred it because it takes care of our highest volume location, which is the biggest concern for both congestion and safety, and it was a lower construction cost. They felt that it would be easier to get it built sooner. We also heard continued interest in a trench alternative and a viaduct alternative, and then, like I mentioned, we talked about some of the construction considerations and impacts there. The property and business owners that we talked to generally kind of fell in the same range. Those that had no effects to their property or minor or moderate effects, they generally preferred alternative C for some of the same reasons that the community meeting folks did. Those who had major effects, specifically Oak Grove and Glenwood, the other two northern crossings, generally preferred alternative A so that their properties weren't impacted as majorly. And again, they had concerns about maintaining access to their residents and customers during construction. So that brings us to where we are today. We're currently in coordinations both with Atherton and Palo Alto because we are next door neighbors, so to speak, and we want to make sure that what we do meshes with what the adjacent communities are looking at as well. I know that you guys are going through a similar study for all of your crossings right now, so we've been in constant coordination to make sure we know what's going on here and vice versa. And then, like I mentioned, our city council asked us to look at potentially what could be done at Encinal, and one of the options, if we fully grade separated for vehicles as well as bikes and peds at Encinal, our northernmost crossing, it would potentially require the rail to have elevation within Atherton's limits, and we want to make sure that that's something that they are or are not okay with before we proceed with responding. So we're in the process of coordinating with their council right now on that. So once we get those and the other questions that council asked us addressed, we're going to come back and then ask them for a preferred alternative. Once we have a preferred alternative decided on and directed, we can then move forward and secure funding so we can start the environmental studies and the final design to move the project forward. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have any questions or comments?
I have one question. I love your videos. Are they posted anywhere?
Yeah, they are. So the website right there, menlopark.org/Ravenswood, all of the information that we presented at the various community meetings, including those videos, are posted up there. Yeah.
So,
If I could just add, we're going to continue to work with the city of Menlo Park to see if there's any opportunities for collaboration on, on our projects as well.
so we have two speakers, Richard Brand, followed by Roland LeBrun.
Good morning again, Richard Brand, Palo Alto, just for the record here, now that we're turned on. I've actually bicycled along Alma, and the rail right-of-way is about 15 feet above the grade at the end of Willow. Did you consider bringing Willow all the way down and then tunneling underneath the right-of-way there, because it would be almost right away. There's no buildings along there. You already have the right-of-way 15 feet above the grade level, and since there's the old Chevy dealer property that you could condemn and it wouldn't interfere with an existing business, did you look at that option?
So I just want to clarify, you mean tunneling Willow under the rail?
That's correct. So you extend Willow through Alma, under the rails, and into El Camino Real.
Okay. So we did not look at that specifically with this study. There's a few different reasons. One, excuse me, we currently have another study going on right now where we are going to build a bike and pedestrian crossing. It hasn't yet been determined under or over. We're looking at the details of that, but there will be a bike and ped crossing at roughly where Middle Avenue comes into El Camino. So there'll be a direct connection for bikes and peds there. The other reason is there is strong opposition from our residents to connect Willow to El Camino, or there has been in the past. And so that would be a separate study, a separate effort that would require its own set of outreach. So the main goal of this project here was a focus on grade separating Ravenswood and potentially looking at our other existing at-grade crossings.
Okay, second speaker is Roland LeBron.
Thank you. So this working? I don't know if you code this on the video, but they're going to start putting island platforms. And we'll be fighting this like crazy at the Caltrain board meetings, okay? This is not BART. This is not the VTA light rail. We are, once the grade separations are in, or potentially before, we're going to be increasing the line speed to 110 miles an hour. You're going to have passengers right there, stuck in the middle of an island platform with trains blowing by on each side at 110. If you go back to the video and you see where the ramp is, there's less than 10 feet between the ramp and the edge of the platform, okay? This has got to stop, because what's going to happen, the High-Speed Rail Authority is going to come back and say, do you know what, we need passing tracks. So you're going to have these massive flyovers, 30, 40 feet up in the air, flying over all that stuff, okay? There was a meeting in San Carlos a couple of weeks ago where they were fighting these, flyover passing tracks like crazy. And I went back to a presentation I gave to the PCC 5 years ago, which is called passing stations. When you go to passing station, you basically get 4 tracks within the station without board platforms. What that does is to substantially increase the capacity of the line, okay? So we can get up to 12, potentially beyond that, trains an hour. What it also does, and I gave multiple examples from Europe, is that the high-speed trains are in the 2 middle platforms, and the passengers are at least 1 track away from these trains. Okay, actually in Europe what they do, the 2 middle tracks are protected with concrete barriers on each side to stop passengers from getting sprayed with water, ballast, and God knows what else. Okay, so please, Palo Alto, put your foot down and say enough of these island platforms in the Caltrain right-of-way. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I have a few quick questions. What assumptions did you use in terms of how frequently trains would go by in your future conditions?
So we're partnered with Caltrain on this study, and so we've been working directly with them, and they review all the iterations of what our consultants put together. So their latest data about the future with electrification and potentially with high-speed rail, we use those latest assumptions.
Do you know, is it train every 3 minutes at peak? Or?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I can get that information and provide it to Josh, so.
Yeah, I'd be
Okay.
interested. I just saw in your video you had the center electrification poles. Are those locked in from Menlo Park?
No, they are not. So between the two alternatives, the simulations that I showed, alternative A, I believe, shows the platforms on the outside and the electrification poles on the outside as well. And the alternative C video shows a platform in the middle, the island platform, and the electrification poles are in the middle in that scenario. We have had a discussion with the council about that before High-Speed Rail had made any statement about the passing track location, the alternative there. And so we do have some guidance on that, but as of right now, until we go into environmental and design, the ultimate decision about where the platforms and therefore the electrification poles has not yet been made.
Okay. And then similar question to Willow. I mean, if we look at the border, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, has there been any consideration of connecting Alma to Alma, particularly if you did that Ravenswood separation?
Yeah, not as part of this project, but that's certainly something that we could look at as we move forward. And it seems that the timing between our two studies is ideal to look at other things that we may want to incorporate together, whether it's looking at connecting Alma, whether it's looking at the Palo Alto crossing location. That's certainly something that we could incorporate with this study and potentially do as one project into construction and design. And Josh and I have talked a little bit about some of the things that we could be looking at.
Yeah, and that was the last question. Has there been consideration about syncing up construction schedules? And
Yeah, definitely. I think if at all possible, if we're going under any kind of construction in a similar time frame, we would want to, whether or not we package it as one is one question, but then definitely we would schedule so that, our east-west connectivity, our communities are so closely knit and a lot of people traveling between the two or through the two, that it would be critical for us to time it so that we don't have all of our crossings under construction at the same time. So definitely.
Thanks.
So, maybe I missed it, but what are the funding sources for A and C?
So the funding source for this study is the San Mateo County Transportation Authority
No, not
grade
the study,
separation.
actually
Mhm.
build the grade separation.
So as of right now, we do not have any funding secured for our future phases.
Okay. So there's no real construction?
No,
timeline?
we need to get direction on our preferred alternative from our council before we can move forward, because then we show better for
For grants
obtaining
and all that.
funding. Exactly.
Got it. When you went to the council, you went on A and C, was that correct?
On the October 10th, we went with A and C. When we went to them the two times before, we had all three, A, B, and C.
And when you went the last time, was it 2-2 on A and C? Was that the issue?
No, it was two, so they did not have a formal vote, but the gist of the conversation sounded like two of them were in support of C, one was in support of A, and another was in support of additional studies.
Got it. Okay. We can get that additional studies council member to run here next time. Yeah, no, I think that's it. Thanks for the great presentation.
Great.
Thanks so much for coming. Do want to echo what Tom mentioned about Alma. I've heard that from a number of community members, though, of course, we would be worried about giving up our great park there. A few things. So one, just to my colleagues and staff, I think this alternative matrix is really helpful, and so are the videos. I would encourage us to look at something like this. One question, depending what you do at Ravenswood, what kind of percent grade increases are you looking at there? And maybe this is a question to our staff. Does that impact our ability if we decide to elevate or lower at Alma?
So at Ravenswood, under alternative A, the train elevation stays as existing. So there,
Silver in the berm.
yeah, so wherever it is now, under both alternatives, we conform at the city limits, so we don't alter the creek or the park area at all. But the train grades do not change under alternative A. So it's as if it's an existing condition as far as the train is concerned. Under alternative C, the train, we have a maximum of 1% requirement from Caltrain right now. So the grade would not go up or down more than 1%. With alternative C, because we start at the south end of town, at our Palo Alto border, it's at a higher elevation than our northern border at Atherton. So we would have, I can pull up the numbers if you want to know the train grade that we're looking at, but it's fairly small. It's like 0.5% or something that we would go up, and then we would have to come back down sharper on the other end.
Sure. So I'm just guessing, like, if we, in some scenario, decide that we want to, go deep from our station down to there, if that would impact. I mean, it would, right? How much would?
Yeah, so we're going to get the numbers from their designer, and we're going to take a look at some different scenarios, one of which will probably be extending the hybrid into Palo Alto, across Palo Alto Avenue, see how that what that would look like. We'll also look at, where they are in relation to the creek and the city limits, and how that would relate to a tunnel on our side or a trench.
I guess I just raised that to my colleagues in that it could be a forcing function for us here, right? If they're starting to increase right at the city border, our options may be limited on this side of the creek.
Well, they're already raised.
But if they're going to do it at the 0.5%. So anyways, we should just be aware of that.
Thanks. Should we move on to item number 2? Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you very much, that was great.
All All right, so item number 2 is a addendum to the Rail Committee Charter.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Hillary Gittleman, the Planning Director. This is really kind of a housekeeping item. If you recall, back in September, the council had a discussion about community engagement during this process and requested an amendment of the committee's charter to include a broader engagement effort on the part of this committee. So we've included in your packet the Rail Committee Charter with the guiding principles that were adopted last April. In addition, in the staff report, we have a paragraph that we're suggesting the committee recommend to the council for addition to the charter. And we've proposed a way that the committee could convene additional meetings to get community input at each stage in the process. So the little diagram we've included in the report outlines basically the 4 phases. We've already completed phase 1, the definition of evaluation criteria. We're currently in phase 2, identifying the alternatives for in-depth analysis, and then there'll be 2 more phases before we get to a preferred alternative. We're suggesting that in each one of these phases, the committee hold a public meeting in a kind of town hall format in addition to its regular morning meeting. That town hall format meeting would be an evening meeting. It could be here at City Hall or it could be elsewhere. And we outlined 2 options in the staff report. One is that this morning meeting happen first, and then a couple days later, the community meeting happen at another venue, and the committee makes its recommendation to council on these items. The other alternative is that the town hall style meeting happens first, and then a couple days later you meet here in the morning and you make your recommendation to the council. So slight variations, but the main thing we're looking for from you is a recommendation to the council on this addition to the charter.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? I think we're being asked a question about community meetings. You want them before the rail or after the rail?
Maybe staff has a recommendation on that. I mean, what are the pros and cons? I mean,
We had a robust conversation ourselves about which is better, and I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both. In the format where we had this meeting first, it would give you an opportunity to hear from some of our regular attendees what their questions are and maybe prepare us better for the evening meeting, because then we could prepare responses and be able to dialogue better. But on the other side, if we have the town hall meeting first, then it allows you to come back into this forum and have a more focused debate and dialogue before making your decision.
okay. All right, that was helpful for me. So I think that I would support doing the town hall first, because then we get the widest community input, and then we can focus our discussions around that. And everyone who would normally attend this meeting can also attend that meeting.
I think that's fair. All the folks in the audience, with respect, we hear from them each and every time, and I expect they'll be at the forums as well. So I think that the mayor's suggestion is a good one.
I think the challenge is for staff to summarize those meetings in time to bring them to us, and they wouldn't really be part of our packet, right?
Well, you would be
You'll
present.
be there.
So,
If somebody misses one, though, right?
we would have to scramble to respond to any comments or questions that we were unable to respond to the night of the town hall meeting.
We would just stay in our offices all day.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
Are we
right.
talking about these for these upcoming town halls?
Well, this is a really good point, because later in the meeting, tonight's meeting, you're going to talk about when we schedule your next couple meetings. And we really were hoping to identify alternatives for evaluation before the end of the year, which means we would try and do this in December. I don't know if that's feasible. It may turn out to be a January kind of thing. But we'll talk about that later today.
I do have concerns if we get much into December, because, people take the holidays, and getting any sort of public participation starts to really be difficult.
Yeah. I think we feel some urgency because we want to get to the same place that Menlo is. We want to be able to do, fancy videos that show you exactly what the alternatives would look like, but to do that, we need to know what the suite of alternatives are.
Though I'd say it looked like they had about 18 months of public outreach first. All right, so I will make a motion. Well, we have one. All right, I'm gonna allow the public comment. I think we're almost done with the item. So first speaker is Roland, followed by her.
Very briefly, in the interest of time, I think I should bring to your attention that the second Wednesday of the month conflict with the MTC Programming and Allocations Committee in San Francisco. And this is really the meeting where the big discussion takes place over the allocation of hundreds of millions of dollars. So I thought that you might want to consider this.
Thank you. Herb.
I have just one editing suggestion at the end of the recommendation. I would break the last sentence into two sentences, removing the word and start a new sentence. The stakeholders, stakeholder input.
Okay, thank you. Nadia.
Hi, Nadia Naik. So I just wanted to point out that we're having all these community meetings, but none of the important papers on which a lot of the decisions are going to be based are actually going to be out in time for those community meetings. So for example, the trenching and tunneling paper is going to be out on the 29th, and then the meeting is going to be on the 30th, but the hydrology and soils paper is not going to be ready. So hydrology and soils, when you're doing a tunnel, could be the difference between a 2X tunnel and a 400X tunnel, depending on what kind of soil you have. So you might be able to discuss construction impacts, but you won't really be able to discuss what's under there. And I would just say that the feedback, we've been getting a lot of requests for private meetings, so I've been doing several. I have one tonight that I'm doing in Southgate. So that number has had a significant uptick. And I would say that what I'm hearing most is that they want to come to meetings, but they feel like there's not enough information for them to make decisions. And so even in the coming community meetings, these papers aren't going to be out. So I would just think about that when you're thinking about trying to narrow down alternatives, because none of this information is really going to be available for them to actually have much of a conversation about. Thanks.
All right, our last speaker, Dina Levin.
Good morning, committee members, Dina Levin, Friends of Caltrain. I want to really bolster what Nadia just said, particularly with regard to the finance study, because there is a lot of really hopeful thinking regarding the possibilities of a trench and a tunnel. And in the absence of information about what the choices are to pay for such a thing, conversation can go around in circles for a really long time, and I think that having that, if people get to talk about what their ideal solution is, and then it turns out that in their judgment when they see that information, that's not something that they want to do, people are going to be very sad. And so having that information, I think, is a really good prerequisite to having an informed conversation as opposed to a less informed conversation. And secondarily, the water, the hydrology is actually important. That was one of the key factors that led Burlingame to change their minds at the council level and the community level between having a trench, which was the initially strongly preferred option, and having a split, which was their ultimate decision, because it turned out that given their hydrology, it was going to be extremely difficult and costly to keep it dry. And that was one of a small number of key factors that led them to that decision. And so similarly, I think that holding those meetings after those key pieces of information will help people feel like, you know, they're having a conversation based on new information rather than like talking and then realizing, oh, what I thought I wanted is not what I wanted. So similar recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so I think we'll get into that in our next item. So I'll go ahead and make a motion that we adopt the addendum with the split of the last sentence. I think that was a good change for readability. And that way we'll hold the town hall meetings before the rail committee meetings.
I'll second that.
Just one quick question. We're talking about, we have these roundtables scheduled now, but there will be more roundtables in the future.
Yeah, we're committing to either roundtables or more community workshops. We will determine the format of those in the future, but what we're talking about in this context are town hall meetings conducted by this committee.
And those town hall meetings would occur at key decision points. If you remember, there were several key decision points along this road that we're on, and that's when those town hall meetings would occur.
Okay. So should we vote on the motion?
Yeah, just one comment. I do think the speakers, and we'll get to this in our next item, but it would be helpful if staff could provide us or the community with kind of like an index of what are these reports, when they're coming, and what they're about, right? Just so we're aware of all that.
We'll do that in the next item. Just a clarification, this is a recommendation to the council, so we'll have to put this on the council's consent agenda.
Okay, assuming it's unanimous. All those in favor? Yeah, okay. All right, moving on to item number 3.
And at the pleasure of the chair, I think the staff was suggesting hearing both 3 and 4 together, since effectively they're integrated in terms of next steps.
Okay.
So I think the presentation will reflect that.
Sure, and I'll give you a quick overview of our plans for the roundtables, and then Claudia is going to talk a little bit about the community questionnaire number 2. We have scheduled 4 community roundtables to occur in November. Just to remind the committee members, we are currently in the alternatives development phase. So some of our speakers mentioned the need to have information available in order to make decisions. Right now, we're in kind of the open solicitation for all alternatives that should be considered. So the information will be available at the point in time when we start to winnow down the alternatives, but we're not at that point right now. Right now, we're trying to hear from as many people as possible what types of options and alternatives they've thought about for the different grade crossings. So the roundtables are, the first one will be November 14th at the Mitchell Park Community Center, and that one will focus on both Charleston Road and Meadow Drive. The second roundtable will be on November 16th at the PAUSD Administration Building. That one will focus on the Churchill Avenue grade crossing. And then after Thanksgiving, we're going to reconvene on November 28th and have a meeting in this room, actually, to talk about the Palo Alto Avenue, AKA Alma Street grade crossing. And then finally, on November 30th, we're going to have a trench and tunnel discussion, and this is where folks can talk about a larger, more comprehensive citywide solution that may involve, multiple grade crossings or all 4 grade crossings. There was a potential conflict on November 30th. The Santa Clara County Planning Department, Planning Commission is holding a meeting to take public comment on the Stanford GUP application. I did coordinate yesterday with Supervisor Simidian's office and the Santa Clara County Planning Director, and that meeting is going to run till 9 o'clock. Our meeting will end at 8 o'clock, and they're going to expect to accommodate people coming from our meeting. So they're actually going to hold that meeting open until 9 p.m., which was the scheduled time. And I told them they'll probably have a handful of folks coming from our meeting to the county meeting. So we have coordinated on that. There is a little bit of an overlap of the meetings, but there's actually another hour available for folks to go from our meeting to that meeting. So the format of the roundtables, we're expecting about 20 to 40 folks. We do already have 46 RSVPs for the first one, Charleston Road and Meadow, so we're working on staffing arrangements for that. How we're going to break the groups out and how we're going to facilitate a larger group. But we're pretty much on track for that 20 to 40 number for the other ones. We are seeing pretty low RSVPs for the November 28th meeting, the Palo Alto Avenue meeting, and we think that's a combination of 2 factors. The first being there's not a lot of interest in that grade crossing. We've seen that to date at the workshops, and it's also immediately after the holiday, the long holiday weekend, so people probably aren't back in town. And the last thing I'd want to do after, eating Thanksgiving dinner is come to a public meeting on a Tuesday. So we're working to ramp up attendance on that. We may need to overflow some people from the other roundtables voluntarily into that one and expand the discussion there if the first one continues to grow in attendance. So the format's going to be a true roundtable discussion. It's not going to be, staff is not going to take a heavy-handed approach. We're going to facilitate the community discussion, and the goal of these discussions is to put every possible alternative or option on the table for consideration. So there's no bad ideas. We'll be assembling a suite of alternatives, as Hillary mentioned, throughout the entire month of November, and we'll be taking input from you as well at a later meeting. At the roundtables, we'll be there to provide information, facilitate. If the conversation comes to a stall, we'll jump in and we'll have some questions that'll help facilitate the conversation. We'll be taking notes and minutes. And we'll summarize all those for you. We are going to ask the folks at the end of the meeting to fill out what we're calling a bingo card, and this will be a matrix with the different grade crossing locations on the top, and then 3 columns where we'll ask them to submit 3 different alternatives for consideration for each of the grade crossings. But they're intended to be relatively informal. We're not going to dominate the discussion with, technical staff presentations. However, we will be there to answer any technical questions that the community members may have. So it's being promoted on social media, the city website. We have, through brown paper tickets, we have an RSVP option for folks so that we can understand what the attendance will be moving forward. With that, I'll turn it over to Claudia to talk about community questionnaire number 2, and then I think we'll be glad to take questions and comments.
Do we mind if we just maybe split the questions and talk about this first and then go to the question? So who wants to go first? Go ahead.
Just one quick comment. Thanks for putting this all together. I found it pretty helpful, and I think so did the public. I think it was Circle Point who was doing these things where they were showing kind of, if we do this kind of grade separation, it means these impacts, right? And so getting the balance on both sides, that if we're going to trench here, there's the taking of this many homes. If we're going to close it, we can, preserve all these homes and improve traffic here. I thought just showing folks the trade-offs there was really helpful and informative.
So thank you for the discussion, because I found this very thin. The meetings are a week away. I would have expected a little bit more. So it sounds like it's going to be brainstorming, and not to contradict Councilmember Fine, but you said if it's no ideas or bad ideas, getting them all out. I think you want to be careful about pros and cons right up front. And so the overall goal wasn't clear to me. I guess you're saying it's really just to generate this list of potential alternatives?
Yeah, if you remember, I think it was the last meeting, I presented the updated schedule with the different stages, and currently we're in the alternatives development stage. So this is the where we developed kind of the master suite of alternatives. The next stage will be the selecting specific alternatives for evaluation. So going back to the Menlo Park example, they had 3 alternatives that they evaluated. We're going to get to, somewhere around 2 to 4 per crossing location, but that's going to happen early in 2018.
These meetings are not detailed alternatives. It's really just idea generation at this point. Is it?
Yeah, we're developing the master suite of alternatives currently. So
Okay.
we expect folks to come. I mean, we will discuss constraints and pros and cons of different options.
So thank you about the update on November 30th. I've been hearing a lot from the public about wanting to move that meeting just because it's 2 big items, Stanford GUP and this. I do wonder in our meeting, it might be difficult with this roundtable format, but if you could maybe identify people that were going to go to that other meeting and let them talk early so they might be able to leave early. And then the November 28th meeting, have we targeted the high-rise apartments that are right there at that crossing?
Yeah, we're going to do some special outreach to them. We're also going to talk to Menlo Park about doing some outreach there. And we're also going to use some of the stakeholder groups that we have from the downtown RPP and other initiatives in the downtown north area to try to get better attendance at that meeting.
Yeah. And then my last question, comment is, I'm not sure how much we should count on this RSVP process. I mean, is there a contingency if a lot more people show than you expect?
Yeah, we're assuming a certain number of RSVPs won't show up, and then we're also assuming a certain percentage of additional folks that did not RSVP will show up. So we're keeping that in mind as we analyze the staffing needs.
Okay, thanks. We do have one member of the public who wants to speak, Dean Levin.
Good morning. I have a comment and a question. So first of all, Thanks for mentioning reaching out to Menlo Park regarding the Palo Alto Alma crossing that is obviously on the border and will also be of interest to people in Menlo Park. And as well, I was just looking at some of the information from the Stanford GUP and noticed that was a significant Stanford commute route. So the Stanford commute program may be another additional way to get people who are users of that crossing to be commenting. So that's a comment. And then the question is regarding the difference between these upcoming meetings, looking at the different locations, and how are these different from the breakout tables that were at the previous meeting. And Friends of Caltrain does promote these meetings to people in the community and recommends attendance, and it would be helpful to be able to really distinguish them if there's a clear distinction between what will happen there and what happened at the previous breakout tables where people were similarly organized by crossing and were making brainstorming type suggestions about their concerns and needs for those crossings. Thank you.
Sure.
So I think there's two answers to that question, Ms. Levin. The first is some of the roundtable discussions at Community Workshop 2 felt artificially abbreviated, and people were, not everybody was able to offer their thoughts. There were a couple tables where, one or two people spoke primarily and the others really didn't get to talk. So this is an opportunity to continue the discussions that occurred at Community Workshop 2. But it's also an opportunity to bring new people in because unlike the workshop, this is going to be on a weeknight. These are going to be on weeknight evenings. So if you remember, the workshops were on a Saturday afternoon. So there are some people that may be available during the week that are not available on Saturdays. We're also going out to the neighborhoods for these, so we're not expecting people to travel to one central location. So we're trying to make this a little more accessible than the one central workshop with the goal of getting additional people involved in the process.
And Nadia?
Hi, Nadia Naik again. So Josh, maybe you could talk a little bit more are they going to have the same kinds of maps and measuring tools and stuff that were at the community workshops? But again, I just, pulling the lens back a little bit, I just wanted to point out, I know this, I totally appreciate the community meetings, as you know, I'm a fan. But I think just generally the way they're being staged, from the community's perspective, you're going to have them have specific location meetings, but again, no real data. And then on the 28th, you will have the financing paper come out and a trenching and tunneling paper come out. And then you're going to have an evening meeting around trenching and tunneling, but less than 24 hours for people to have read that paper. And then you're going to have potentially the week of December 6th or 12th. That will be a decision point where you guys will be deciding to whittle down alternatives, but yet the community would not have had a chance to both participate in an open free think session and digest this data and give you feedback on how to narrow those alternatives. So I understand that we're having community meetings before decision points, but you're not really allowing the community to have kind of deep dives on those kind of big topics that are coming. So if you play that out, your hydrology and soils paper doesn't come out probably till January, which is kind of really, really the delimiting factor on trenches and tunnels, which, as we all know from the Circle Point questionnaires we've had previously, it is the leading and most favored alternative. So my point is, despite the fact that you're trying to engage the community, you're really leading them towards a kind of bloodbath where you get them all super excited about something, and then you might potentially tell them you can't have your cake. So.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I guess I was looking at the comments on the trench and the tunnel, and I sort of agree with Nadia on that a little bit. I mean, I think these are a little too optimistic in some way, these are written. I mean, do we really think?
Questionnaire yet?
Oh, I thought we were on the questionnaire.
We're
too.
going to have, let's Nadia speak to that first.
Oh, all right. We can talk to that later then. Okay.
So should we move on to the questionnaire?
I thought we were
Just
trying
one
to fortify.
thing. Just to dig into that issue of, we're going to release the paper and have a meeting the next day, and then the hydro paper isn't out for another month. If we wanted to change that scheduling of these meetings, could we kick these out to January or something? I just want to put that out as a hypothetical.
change the dates of the roundtable.
Yeah.
We've
We're
already
doing them
advertised
again.
them, it's been in the newspaper, and it's on the city website, we have RSVPs. I mean, we usually get a lot of flack when we reschedule
Yeah.
public meetings.
I mean, is there a way to like do them again or something? I don't know.
Just to reiterate, we're not making any decisions at the roundtable, so, the folks will have plenty of time to digest the papers as they're released. The data will be available at the roundtable on the 30th to talk about, but we're not.
Sure, but I mean, these are going to be pretty complex papers that,
I guess
and
maybe
information.
another alternative would be, before we narrow those alternatives, if we had another roundtable once the papers come out.
Well, you're going to summarize them, right, at the roundtable?
Yeah, we're going to have a presentation that summarizes the
Most of them
trenching and
listen to
tunneling
the
paper.
summary as opposed
I know,
to
but
read the entire paper.
that's kind of like us getting a packet to make a big decision the day of, right?
But they're not making any decisions.
No, but we're giving them the indication that they're helping make that decision. And
This is more like a study session. I mean, I don't disagree that it's not perfect, but it's more like a study session.
we may, I guess I'm saying, we may want to look at some kind of meeting towards the end of January, as
Like you
Tom
said,
mentioned.
If there's another roundtable
Yeah.
that takes the results and then has the hydrology paper and all these other papers before we narrow alternatives, that might be
Yeah.
the best route.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so we're being pretty loose with public comment. That's part of our new charter. So Tony, if you go ahead.
Tony Carrasco, 583 Glenbrook Drive in Palo Alto. Just wondering if the traffic report that was sent out to everyone sort of describes the vertical alignment of these trains. It seems like Churchill in all cases is on grade, which determines where the alignment should be. And so the question that I have for you guys is that has the vertical alignment of the tracks been determined, or are we still open to trenches and tunnels in the north?
Nothing's been determined, and we're going to talk about that circulation study later today. Thank you. Okay, so why don't we move on to the questionnaire?
Thank you. Claudia Keith, Chief Communications Officer. In your packet is a second draft community questionnaire that follows along. If you recall, we sent out an initial one over the summer as a touch point with the community. This is meant to be another data point in trying to get input from the community. It talks about a variety of different considerations for alternatives at the grade crossing. It assumes some knowledge, but we really are trying to, in part of this, broaden the scope of people who may not have attended community meetings or not been really engaged at all. We plan to, after the committee's input, send the questionnaire out similarly as we did the first round, where it was to a fairly large universe, and we got about 10% of the folks sending it back, which really is a lot. Don't know whether, we would get that same response, but again, it's meant to be just another data point as we're really trying to gather the community's perspectives on alternatives. So that's the purpose of the second community questionnaire. We would summarize the results as we did the first one as part of your deliberations. And one of the thoughts that we had was perhaps to use some of these questions as a facilitation in the roundtables potentially, because they would be the kinds of things that the community might be talking about at the specific grade crossing. So, we'd like to get the committee's input both on the specific questions and potentially any kind of outreach that you would like to see us do.
It's Greg, you get some comments?
Yeah, I do. So I guess they're just sort of all on different questions. So we talk about, so I think we say things like, if there are constraint, where was it, the one with North Palo Alto, let's say.
Yeah, Q7, question 7.
Yeah, we're trying to. Right. That was too challenging. That was fine. Let me read. I had it where I wanted. Why don't you someone else go on, and I'll come back to what I wanted to say.
Eric, you have any comments? I wondered if we should add a question about closing a crossing. If something like if an existing crossing were closed, are there any existing crossings that should be widened? And maybe University, Embarcadero, Oregon, or other.
I'd support that.
So, you know.
Okay, we did have one question 4, but it was basically if we closed it for a bike ped only alternative.
Yeah, but we don't really talk about the possibility of widening, like, say,
Okay.
Embarcadero, which is near
Okay.
Churchill. And the other thing, on the outreach, I think it was Adina that suggested Stanford for the Palo Alto crossing. I think that was a good suggestion as well.
Just one thing, I think part of this is we're trying to figure out the community's sensitivity to different outcomes here. And one piece that's not touched on here is the funding. It may be helpful to have a question around that, saying, depending on the type of grade separations we do, there are different cost estimates, and we could give some ballparks. It might also be helpful to ask people to indicate, would you be willing to get grant funding from the regional guys? Would you be willing to do some kind of transit tax? Would you be willing to do a bond measure? I mean, these are the things that we kind of know may be coming down the pipeline. And I think it would be helpful to see Palo Alton's opinions about that.
So, okay, let me try to get back to it. So what are we trying to actually accomplish with this?
That seems to be a
So as
popular
we
question with the
as we develop our
audience.
suites of alternatives, we're going to need to think about which ones make sense, from a community opinion, and we don't want to put something out there that's just a complete no-go. So this will help us, as we move forward with the assembly of the suite of alternatives, and then eventually when the Rail Committee and Council needs to select the alternatives to move forward into evaluation.
So this is my concern with it. I guess I'll put it this way. And it's something that Claudia said, is we want to engage more people who may know nothing about this. In a complete vacuum, I'm voting for the tunnel, number one. Then I'm voting for the trench. And then after that, I'm unhappy with most of the other alternatives. So I think we know that to start with. I don't think there's any mystery about that. I think that, we've had community meetings. So the more difficult questions are, and I think you get to them a little bit when you say, if it turns out a trench or tunnel in the north end is too challenging, which of these alternatives would you like to consider? I think that's a helpful question. I think like in Q6, without knowing more about feasibility, which of the crossings would you be open to considering in Palo Alto? I think it'd be almost helpful to say, we need a question that says if a trench or a tunnel, is not feasible, and I think it's good to break it up between South Palo Alto and North Palo Alto, I think. And then I think we need to break up the difference between a trench and a tunnel. I don't think we do that. I think we say trench tunnel. I think they're completely different animals. So that's really sort of my concerns with this is, I'm not sure.
Does question number 8 capture your concern? It says if a tunnel is too costly, what would you consider?
Well, it says the question is if there are costs that make trenching or tunneling challenging, which of these alternatives would you consider? I think we need to break up trench and tunnel. And I'm wondering if we should explain a little bit difference in, a trench is an open area where you may not be, you may be able to cover portions of it, but a lot of it's not covered. A tunnel, I think everyone's familiar with what a tunnel looks like. I think we're a little too optimistic about tunneling under the creek. Frankly, I think we say there may be constraints. I mean, I think may is like a little too soft. I would think that there would be constraints with a trench going through Oregon Expressway, where that grade separation is, that seems to me to be a major challenge that we're not identifying. I also think there's a major challenge of trenching, and there may be major challenges of trenching, of tunneling under those too, of Embarcadero. I mean, those seem to be like major rebuilds. And the cost of major rebuilding that, to Tom's point earlier, it may be cheaper to widen Embarcadero there and rebuild that bridge so it's 4 lanes. And so I'm thinking there's more useful information about rebuilding Embarcadero, and I think we're way too optimistic the way we write this about a tunnel or a trench underneath in the north part of Palo Alto.
Okay.
And so that's my concerns.
I mean,
Yeah.
at the same time, when you're doing survey questions, you don't want to bias the answer.
Well, yeah, we were trying to balance sort of
So,
between,
I don't agree with that, actually. I think if you want useful information, you have to give people some of the constraints so they can at least have something in their head about that. Whereas if you say, as I said, in a complete vacuum, why would everyone not vote for a tunnel? I mean, you get it out of change, you don't see it, so I mean, I think we know that. I mean,
It's just that there's the science to writing survey questions, and you got to strike the balance.
well, but I haven't heard a
Well,
scientific
well,
explanation of
well,
this.
Well, there is kind of a science to this stuff, and so, I mean, what phase are we in here? Are we polling the community for more, are we in focus group land where we're polling the community for more ideas and make sure we've got everything covered? Or are we in the phase where, okay, we got these alternatives, we understand the trade-offs, and we're polling to see what percentage of people want this trade-off versus that trade-off, and we're going to say, okay, 3/4 of people this way in full knowledge, and these are the alternatives and stuff like that. So which one of those are we in here? What phase are we in here? Sort of like.
We're in the brainstorming phase pretty clearly. Right?
Okay, so then are we going to say, well, 51% of people said they wanted a trench, okay, and 49% of people said they wanted a tunnel, so we're going to go with a trench, right? I mean,
If we are in the brainstorming phase, I don't think we should be asking questions that get us answers we either know or aren't helpful. So like I'm looking at question 5. What about considering the addition of a new grade separated crossing for bikes and peds? I doubt anybody's going to say, no, I'm not open to this idea, right? So is that actually getting us helpful information?
well, it depends. Are we brainstorming,
Right.
collecting alternatives, or are we trying to do conjoint analysis here? Right?
Yeah.
Well, are we actually brainstorming? I actually don't view survey questions as that useful in brainstorming. I think what survey questions are is we need to identify preferences between realistic alternatives a little bit that give us useful information. And we need to identify strong points of opposition. Like if 100% of the people say 80% of the people in Palo Alto say, we do not want to see any, takings of land. That's something to know. If 40% say, we don't want to see takings, that means 60% might be okay with it. That's the kind of stuff I want to know from surveys. I want to know where the strong points of opposition are, and when people have to start looking at harder choices, what their preferences are. Because if you give the people a really easy way out, which is, let's do a tunnel, I'm all for the tunnel.
Well, I think, that would have been my sense as to where we are actually, is we're past sort of the brainstorming phase. And we're actually sort of getting starting to dip a toe into the water of what choices are we making at a very, very high level, right? And so we're going to sort of get into the quantitative phase here, right? It's got to be really, really preliminary, right? But then people are going to have to understand what some trade-offs are, right? Which is, I think, the point over here, right? Which is, you can't just ask, do you want a pony? Okay. Now you got to start asking the question. I like that. Do you still want a pony if you got to muck out the stables and brush it every day? Right? Okay, I mean, we sort of got into that, but like at a very high level.
So do you have a couple of public speakers? This is a good conversation. Do we want to?
That's it for the public.
All right. So Adina, followed by Nadia.
All right, I have two questions, one that's a little narrower and one that's a little broader. So the narrower one is there's a question about age, and it was really, really difficult to figure out what that question is getting at. I mean, it seems like there is some underlying intent, like, are you 80 years old, but you're really thinking about the next generation and your great-grandchildren. Like, it seems like somebody has something in mind, and it's not being said what it is, and I think that it's not clear what the goal is, and the outcome might be to make people annoyed because it's super unclear about where that's going. The other question is getting to the really substantive decision about asking people to make trade-offs. The thing about these surveys is that you can only do a certain limited number of these, and asking people about their preference about trench and tunnel and cost right before the information comes out is really burning the option of asking people the information after it comes out. And people will make much more informed decision after it comes out. I mean, if somebody said, hey, do you want a pony? I would love a pony. Okay, the pony costs $500. Okay, I can make that babysitting, I'm happy. You want a pony? Okay, that costs $100,000. No, that is far beyond my babysitting income, right? I think it is not respectful of the community to be asking the question that requires real information. The information is about to come out, but it's giving a physics quiz before the class as opposed to after. It's asking the opinion before you have the information. I think that's really not right. I don't think that this should be done in terms of, I think asking for those trade-offs is super important for this process and will be really valuable after that information comes out and people can digest it, and is really deeply problematic beforehand. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have several speakers, so I'm going to start using the timer.
Just my luck.
Nadia, followed by Elizabeth.
So I'm going to follow you. Yeah. It's okay, I talk fast. So I'm just going to say that, following the horse metaphor, you've got the cart before the horse. What is the point of this survey? Is this a poll? Is it a survey, whoever answers it gets a prize or not? Like, you're not really asking the right questions. To what Adina's saying, you're not giving any data. Usually, when you think about using a survey, you think about an opportunity to educate the public. Is this survey going to have a map? Are you going to explain to people that the value of Caltrain is that it takes 2 lanes of traffic at peak hour in both directions? Are you going to explain to them how many more trains are going to be coming? There's actually factual errors in the very introduction. It says that we only currently have 2 existing grade crossings, and we don't talk about Oregon Expressway. So, I mean, you've got to be really careful about the information you're putting in there. You want to use this as an opportunity to educate people. To Adina's point, if you're going to then put out new information, wouldn't that be a better time to put this stuff out? The other thing is, this is an opportunity for you to have people rank options 1 through 5, right? Use some of that more tailored questioning. If you answered this, then maybe you think this, right? But there's some cases where you're asking about funding and you muddle a few ideas together, but you don't really go into them. Ask people, if you really want to know stuff, what you want to know is, would you be willing to tax yourself? Do you want a business license tax? Do you want us to go out for regional funding? Do you want us to, what? And there's not any sort of depth to a lot of the questions where you really want to ask questions. To Mayor Scharf's point, the biggest question is, are you willing to take people's homes? And do you even know which alternative you may or may not be picking and what that does? I don't think anybody has the level of sophistication that you're thinking about to be able to answer this survey. With the age question, okay, so I'm with Adina. I don't know what we were trying to get to, but I will point out 2 flaws. Number one is, the first question is, are you going to be 20 in the year 2030? So you have a lot of 7-year-olds answering this survey right now. Like, it's got to be all over Walter Hayes, is what I'm thinking. Okay? Number 2 is, the question could be given to the entire population of the Stanford campus, but you didn't ask them if in 2030 they're going to be living in the city of Palo Alto. Right? So these questions, you have to be really careful. I would also say people would take a lot of offense to that age question. And you don't want everyone answering the smiley face, because it's probably not a smiley face in their mind. Right? So I think you need to be really careful. I think you need to understand the relevance of what you're really asking. You don't want to over-survey. You're having them have all these brainstorming sessions, and think about it. From their perspective, they're going to go to all these community meetings with no real information and get super excited. And then you're going to send them this thing, and they're going to keep checking off their favorite answers because they all want the ponies, guys, right? And so then what? And I think, so I would suggest that you hold off on this survey until after you've done all these community meetings, until you've really thought about what you want to be asking these people. Thank you.
Thanks. So Elizabeth, Alexis, followed by Roland.
Yeah, so I'm pretty much with Nadia, is I would hold off on a survey now until you know exactly what you want to ask, and I'm going to be talking in item 5 extensively, and you may come up with some other questions you might want to ask people, but yeah, I mean, first of all, we need to have people just reading these surveys and editing them incredibly carefully. As Nadia said, not only do we miss in the opening like how many grade crossings we have. We actually say that we have 6 roadways that cross, and these intersections called grade crossings. No, they are not grade crossings. They are train crossings, some of which are grade crossings and some of which are grade separated crossings. You know, unless you're going to give good information, like in a poll that gives you a little information ahead of time. I mean, the second thing is, I think around the world we've discovered the downside to asking people their opinion on a matter, right? Like if you can't give it to them, or even if you give it to them, it's a 55-45, what do you get out of that information? If instead you want to get a temperature, then you have like a 0 to 5 kind of reading, right? Like, especially on the question, I think there are questions that sooner rather than later do need to be asked about eminent domain, and eminent domain both on, because people will have different feelings about eminent domain on houses that already back the tracks. People sort of feel like, you know, they knew what they're getting into, versus people on the cross streets where people may not feel like that's quote unquote fair. I don't know. But until you ask that question, and that's kind of a 0 to 5 thing. The same thing on sort of taxing and other things. So I think it's early. I also think that, and I'm going to talk about this in number 5, I don't think we know why people use the different roads that they use yet. And the point that we'll be making is that right now the Alma, Palo Alto, and Churchill are not about getting across town. They're about getting on and off Alma safely. And so if you want to talk to people to really understand what's going on, you may want to ask them some very specific questions, like in the Embarcadero one, like which of those turn movements are you comfortable doing? Because a lot of them put you into unprotected turns against 4 lanes of traffic. So I think there are some things that you could ask that would help you understand more of the sort of the current situation in Palo Alto. There are some things which I think we do need to get a temperature on, the thing that could eliminate or include alternatives with the eminent domain issues. But you also need, again, education. Like, so I hear a lot of things that are just not true, right? That, you know, they're going to take your house and you'll get $2, or you're going to lose your property tax basis, right? Like, so you also, you know, these become very emotional issues. So without, you know, enough information, like, we're not going to get good answers on this. So anyway, that would be, my suggestion would be to hold off. I think we need to, we're really far ahead of where we need to be at this point. And you're going to ask people if they want the pony, just as everyone said. And just look around the world. Is it always a great idea to ask, you know, sometimes you have to be very careful with these things. Thanks.
So Roland, followed by Stefan Rosenblum.
Mr. Chair, I might, if I could interject, we did receive word that we will be interrupted in a little more than 10 minutes, so I want to think about how the remainder of this, we have an indication there will be a fire drill that will occur.
I mean, I think we'll
at
finish this
9:30.
item and we'll probably have to come back.
Okay.
So I think before you go out to have questionnaires, the issue is that you might raise people's expectations beyond reality. And to start, when you're talking about tunnels, there's 2 kinds of tunneling. Okay, there's tunnel boring, which is one way, and the other way is known as cut and cover. And cut and cover is really no different than trenching, except that after you're done trenching, you stick a lid on top of it. So you got to understand that. So cut and cover is not going to work with Oregon, it's not going to work with the creek. Tunnel boring will. And actually, on one of the programs I have, the tunnel is not even on the tracks, it's on the Alma. But the issue that you now have, okay, great, you got the tunnel, but what you going to do about stations? So my advice to you is you really want to go and look at what's going on in San Francisco right now. They're going to make a decision by the end of the year. With one alignment is going to be cut and cover, or another alignment which is going to be tunnel boring. For 1.7 miles of tunnels, the cut and cover, you're looking at $4.5 billion Think about that, right? Tunnel boring, you're probably more in the $2 to $2.5 billion, and it's going to be much longer. It's probably in the 3 Mile region. But the station itself is $500 million. So you really got to start, thinking about that before you go in with a questionnaire, because people might say, well, this is great, we're going to go and have a tunnel, and then you go, oh, whoops, we can't possibly do anything like that, and then, people start losing credibility. So my advice to you, keep a close eye on San Francisco between now and the end of the year, and then take it from there.
And Stefan Rosenblum.
Yeah, I also just wanted to agree with the previous speakers. I think I've been coming to these meetings now for about 4 years on the rail, and I consider myself pretty well informed as a private citizen, but I haven't done near the work of some of the other people that have spoken. And I can't see the value of sending a survey out like this to people who may be totally uninvolved in the issue and asking them what they want or without knowing any of the trade-offs. So I think saving staff's time, I think the community meetings, the town halls, I think the people will be getting information. They'll have a chance to discuss with staff, and they'll be able to make a more informed decision about what they want rather than just getting a survey and filling it out with no information. So I think you should not send a survey out at this time and postpone it till when we're really looking at choosing between a few alternatives and can discuss exactly what the trade-offs are. Thank you.
All right, so we have about 7 minutes till the surprise fire drill. Does staff want to respond to some of the public comments?
If I could just make a couple comments. And first of all, I wanted to clarify, it's a questionnaire, not a survey. We're not trying to get statistically valid responses here. And I think we should clarify the objectives. It's not only for us to learn what people are thinking and get their input, but it's also so that people start to think about this difficult challenge the city is facing. And a challenge that's going to be something that is meaningful for generations to come. So we've tried to make questions that maybe there are no right answers to, but that get people thinking like, oh gosh, maybe it won't be feasible to do a trench. Maybe we will have to think about other alternatives. And gosh, maybe this is a project that's going to be something that happens for the next generation of people and not for me. So we got some great thoughts about how the questions could be reframed or reworded, but I think there is a value to a questionnaire at this point for the lay people who don't come to these meetings and don't understand it in the same depth as some of the people in the room. Now, of course, if the committee wants to put it off, we can do that and do it in the new year, but let's think about how we're reaching the people who are not going to come to these roundtables. This might be a way to get them informed about just how complicated the problem is that we're facing.
I agree with that sentiment completely, that it's useful. Unfortunately, I don't think this questionnaire does that. I think this questionnaire does what the public speakers, basically. I think it sets up, do I want a pony? Of course I want a pony. I don't think it engenders deep thought. And I agree also that how many times can we send these questionnaires with the same questions? So we should I think we should rethink the whole questionnaire. I think we should send it out, but I don't think these are the right questions, and I don't think we can recreate them today. I think we should give broad direction to go back. I think we should wait till after the studies come out. They're coming out fairly soon. I think you can use some of the information. I could take each one of the questions, like the speakers didn't say the same thing, that if we say, do you want a business license tax, to pay for this? I mean, I don't want to pay the tax, so sure, let's tax business. Or would I consider a parcel tax? Well, I might consider a parcel tax if it's $30. If it's $4.5 billion over my parcel and you want $10,000 a year or $20,000, no. So, I mean, I think all of these things without context and making the hard choices isn't helpful. So I think we need the information. We need to put the information in the questionnaire to make people think. And so I'd wait till we have the studies.
I'm probably a little less on the extreme detail in the questions, but I think maybe going back, I think, again, when you explained kind of the intent behind things like the age question, it's more understandable, but I think we probably need to go back and reword them or think about how to ask them. And I do think it's a really good point that you just want to start to indicate how complex this is. So I think when you come back, maybe be really clear about the goal and, the purpose and opportunities for future questionnaires and surveys. So.
I'll just say I'm persuaded by a lot of the speakers in public that this probably should come back after, or we should send this out after the studies are out. I think also, or at least I hope, that some of the roundtables might surface a few more areas where we don't quite have the pulse of the community. We may want to get it. So at the roundtables, specifically the locational ones, we might find a few other issues where we want to get some data points, and the survey may be helpful after that. I think December 1st is a bit ambitious here.
So I'm actually wondering if, so do we want to make it a formal motion on this, or do we need to?
Would you like, you don't need a formal motion?
I think we can take your comments back, put this on ice for a month, and maybe at your next meeting, come back with some recommendations about a survey we could do now, focused on a clear set of objectives, or one that we would do in the future, or one that we would do in the future with all of the technical information. I guess I would just add, I don't see a world in which we won't be doing in-depth analysis of the trench or tunnel idea. So even if we put all the information that we get out of these upcoming studies, I still think that's going to be in the suite of alternatives that we carry forward for more in-depth analysis, so we will always be learning more about that. I could be wrong, but that's just the pulse of the community right now. But
So I'm going to suggest that could we move the circulation study to a future meeting? I think it's going to take a fair amount of time. And if we could quickly maybe go through the briefing paper and future agendas, we might be able to wrap up before the alarm goes off. Is that acceptable?
I agree. Yeah. 3 minutes.
Well, before we agree to do that, because normally we schedule this meeting to 11, how long is the fire drill? Is it a 10-minute fire drill? Or? And who scheduled a fire drill during our rail committee meeting?
They don't check for approval on those type of things.
Yeah, generally go till 10 o'clock. Right.
I would imagine the drill will take at least 20 minutes or so.
Okay, fair enough.
So staff's report.
Let's see, you want to talk about the briefing paper? Or
No,
should we talk future agendas? Should we jump to that?
Okay, yeah, we could do that. I thought we could get through this as well.
Oh, I thought we switched to that to an information item, because we have so many other
That's fine, did we?
items on the, I can do that if you want me to.
That's fine. No, let's just do future agendas.
Okay, so just to give you a quick snapshot on a look ahead, we currently do have on calendar November 29th as your next rail committee meeting. I have heard some suggestion that that might be a problem for members, so be perhaps worth confirming that. We also have the city clerk checking to see if there's potential for a meeting in the week of December 11th. I think your last council meeting for the year is that evening. So if we can get a quorum on that week, then we could proceed with the meeting.
So the 29th works for me.
I can do the 29th, not the week of the 11th.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I'm confirmed for the 29th. I have to look at December.
Okay, and there's I believe, a doodle poll that's in process.
So I do think the circulation study is pretty important. The 29th is very full. I'm wondering if maybe we should move Burlingame to January or something, or
I've already pushed them off a couple times. I'd be worried we might lose them entirely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do think we need to rebalance that agenda on the 29th.
Just for the purpose of a quick run-through, on the 29th, we currently have tentative scheduled the Burlingame presentation on their Broadway Grade Separation Project, discussion of the alternatives that are in process, discussion of the trenching and tunneling white paper, finance white paper, and your monthly rail program briefing.
And we throw the circulation study in there.
Exactly.
Well,
How are we going to do the circulation study?
So if we're able to have a December meeting, based on our discussion today, I don't think we'll be talking much about the development of alternatives and selecting alternatives for analysis December in the December meeting. So we could push some of the November 29th items to December 11th and then push the December 29th items into the new year.
And potentially extend the November 29th meeting if that is workable from your schedules, because it sounds like it will be a deeply technical discussion.
And then we get some good holiday reading.
Yeah, so we we're going to get very busy with these roundtables. I hope everybody can make the roundtables. And I guess please respond to the clerk on the doodles for December. All right, so I guess we'll call the meeting adjourned here. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Menlo Park.
Yeah, thanks to Menlo Park.
Yes. We actually do get that a lot.
Yeah.